Thanks, Luke.
Yeah.
Yes.
Told you, I always forget. So, you know.
It's now recording, so for the benefit of anyone catching up on this, I think at the moment we're discussing the latest version of the Challenge 7 paper in the Dropbox, the one which ends with the initials PD, because Phil Dawid edited it last, which I think just a day or two ago. Right, so where were we?
And so just to recap then, what I did was to reorganize the points that were already there without changing any of them into some sort of flowing logical structure. And I emphasize the some sort of. And the question Valerie just asked was about the first section, which I labeled Introduction / Generalities, and what was I conceiving of its place? Well, I think a bit of both. I mean, some of it, I think, quite a lot of it could actually be introductory material, but it wasn't clear to me that all of it would be, and maybe some of it goes a bit later on. So there are one or two challenges mentioned, very towards the bottom. For example, what further research is needed? It's an obvious challenge. Setting up the infrastructure to enable urgent decision making. But it strikes me that not a lot of this document is actually directly focused on identifying challenges.
No, I think that's a slight problem at the moment. I mean, there are lots of really good points, but we need to sort of try and think how best to use them.
Yeah.
So what?
Maybe the next step is for people to think about identifying and extracting challenges from this, and of course additional material. It doesn't have, maybe there's important things which may be missing. To try, I think we come to the point where if we're writing a challenges paper, we really should be trying to think of some challenges.
Yep.
I think there's some
about addressing them.
There's the challenge of estimating or computational challenges associated with the complex stochastic models, and the need for actually very detailed models in the early stage of the epidemic, whereas the deterministic, more simple models are usually the go-to in those situations.
So you're saying the need for very detailed models in early stages?
Well, maybe no, that's not. In short term, no. What does it say?
Is it more that in the early stages you've got high levels of stochasticity?
Yeah,
exactly. Sorry, that's the point.
But you don't have the ability to capture it in your models, in your estimation.
Thanks, Paul. Yeah. Yeah.
So I think, yeah, I mean, so yeah, there are a number of sort of points which do point reasonably clearly to direct challenges, and a lot of other sort of general stuff which could somehow be crystallized into challenges, but haven't yet been so.
I mean, from my point of view, there's a lot of very nice kind of desire to do sort of, full uncertainty quantification, but I mean, people who are more expert in the area than me can tell me, but from my point of view, it doesn't seem to be completely straightforward to do that for realistic models.
Well, there's a challenge.
So I think that's a challenge, yeah. So I think a lot of this could just be rephrased in that way.
We have a funded project to do it for MetaWards, which is, I think, a fully large model. Now we haven't done it yet, but it is underway, and I think that's worth putting in as a challenge. It is a challenge, I think, to do for a full-size model in terms of dimensionality and in terms of computational complexity, and it might be worth just referencing the project that is attempting to do that, rather than saying it can. Well, I think it can be done. It's going to be hard. MetaWards turns out to be quite difficult. It's very non-Gaussian, it's very non-linear.
Yeah.
I could be probably more closely involved than I am.
I think there's a spectrum as well. isn't there, though? Because I mean, you've got firstly complexity in the models, and how do you do estimation when you've got a highly complex model? But you can also have very highly complex data where you can use very sophisticated sort of data augmentation type approaches, but they're very hard to scale. So all of this begins to come down to complexity, doesn't it? In terms of, you have both complexity in the data to deal with and also complexity in the model to deal with, and they throw up different challenges, right? And
yeah,
I think that, to me, you know, outside of the introduction of the document, there are challenges in every single component of this that we've put up online so far. I think you know, it's just the whole thing is difficult, right? When you're talking about estimation, you know, it's just a very, very challenging problem, full stop.
Can I just make a general suggestion about identifying challenges? What constitutes a challenge? And would it be reasonable to say that a challenge is something you could think of making a grant proposal to do?
Yeah,
I think we've tended to think it was certainly something that would be a substantial piece of work. So, you know, it might be a topic for a PhD thesis, or could be a you know, a grant proposal. It might be a smaller piece, but in general, something that's going to be a substantial effort to do and require quite, you know, a considerable amount of thought. Not something that can be done in the next few months necessarily.
yeah.
And not something so general that we really wouldn't know how to go about doing it. So, you know, we're doing, you know, apple pie stuff.
yeah, sure. Does it help to try and frame challenges around the sort of phases of a possible pandemic, and also maybe within that as a sort of suborder to do it from difficulties with the kind of modelling people already do to scope for bringing new sorts of estimation to bear? So, you know, if you're thinking of outbreak at the very beginning, then there's, suppose you assume some sort of branching process model for the first few cases, then there are well-known problems of getting you know, misestimating because you don't take proper account of the way that, let's say, variability in the infectious period, you know, biases your early estimates. Because presumably in the very earliest stage, you're trying to say, at least for the population it's got into at the moment, you know, is this something that spreads from human to human with R naught greater than 1, and therefore potentially pandemic, and obviously at the same time we'd probably like to estimate its growth rate. So, you know, do we really need to take urgent steps to do something about that this week, or is it the kind of thing that it will grow slowly over some longer period of time? And so, I mean, I think there'd be conventional problems of estimation, and though maybe those are fairly well sorted, but I think that saying that doesn't, as I understand it, I think what a lot of people would very reasonably say is that by the time you've narrowed it down to saying it's a branching process, and here I've got my first few cases from the hospital, I'm going to do some kind of Bayesian estimation, let's say, of R naught, is already perhaps not taking account of various sorts of uncertainty, and therefore uncertainty quantification, or getting in some expert judges to look at it and say, do you think this, you know, so you know, an expert judgment here would be, what is the probability you would give that this will lead to a major pandemic? Where even if they all if they all say it's definitely more than 5%, or at least they say it's very likely more than 5%, you should probably be ringing alarm bells. Whereas perhaps a conventional analysis might not be pointing out the danger, because it's assuming it knows too much. It's not.
Is there a sort of cyclical argument going on here, though, right? Because in the early stages, a lot of those probabilistic forecasts were done from models. And then there's the challenge of how do you put the uncertainty into the parameters of the model at the early stages when you don't have much data. So you've got, I don't know whether there's a question there about how you would use, perhaps use prior elicitation to impact your prediction models that people then use to make probabilistic forecasts about what might happen.
I think that's one of the places where expert elicitation is really important when you don't have any data.
And it really matters in those early stages, but you want to be true to what little data you have is saying, and not pretending it's saying too much, but nevertheless wanting to find any real signals that are there.
Even the data themselves can be a challenge to estimation, as in some countries like Italy, now even availability of data is very limited. So that might also be a challenge. How can we formulate frameworks for recording and curation of data on a regular basis that allows for, data to be ready to be interpreted by models?
I agree with that, but I think there's an issue that often, in the absence of hard data, there are experts who have seen that data or who know about that data, and therefore you can elicit from them the essence of the data without having to input those actual numbers. Now, that's clearly not as good as putting the actual numbers in, but if you can't get hold of them, a mediated set of data coming through an expert is better than nothing. And I think that is a challenge we often don't rise to. We think we need hard data, but in fact, sometimes we just need information from someone who's seen the data or who knows about the data. So I'm not sure I put that terribly well, but
no, I think that's a very interesting point, Peter. Yeah. I don't think that's been raised before.
I think it's a really pertinent point as well, because you find that there's various sensitivity to data, and data can't be taken off various systems. So you often don't actually, you may actually be able to see the data, but not take it away and analyze it properly. So then I think it's going to be probably increasing importance as you have, like at the ONS, you have the secure research server, which you have to be accredited to use, and then you have to get permission to get data off, providing it's non-disclosive, and they've got a very high bar for these things.
One of the things that the RAMP initiative is currently considering quite seriously is and this comes through Delve actually as well, is ways of organizing data, data availability, trustworthiness of researchers to be given access to data, things like this.
But yeah, quantifying, the uncertainty from people who've seen the data is probably going to be an important thing in any future pandemic.
But there are also, so coming back to Luke's point earlier and linking in there, I think there is another point about so some of the biases that are present in some of the data are not necessarily things that go away as you collect more data. So in the early stages of the outbreak, we weren't doing systematic testing. So if you're trying to fit models looking at cases, for example, then those cases are going to be biased. Or if and actually because you can't go back in time and collect that information, you're always going to have that bias in some of those data that are available, and that directly impacts on your estimation challenge, right? Because you've either got to deal with that in the model somehow, or you've got to adjust your predictions accordingly, right? Or you've got to choose particular types of data to calibrate to. which perhaps minimize those biases. I mean, is that something that the expert elicitation type stuff can feed into in terms of how you might deal with those sorts of systematic data collection challenges? I don't know.
Especially at the early stage, I agree. And typically those data are even aggregated over a whole country or a whole region, at least the publicly available data. So that's another challenge related to your point, TJ. How do we infer from aggregated data when we know that the disaggregated data will tell us more?
Well, when we've got to do things like that, when we need more detail than we actually have, there's no other data on which to try and calibrate it, then a lot of expert judgment comes in, but one has to be ready to integrate new relevant data as that comes in as well. And this relates to some extent to the things we're talking about, changes in modeling over time. Well, it didn't, although in the list it wasn't saying much about biases, which perhaps should be added, which is an important thing about, particularly, well, actually, it's at every stage there are going to be biases in the data, and selected data and aggregated data. And it's the question what, so the challenge, I guess, is try and make as much sense as possible and decide what data to go ahead and get in the future if possible.
I mean, the challenge doesn't have to be a passive challenge in the way that we have to make best work of the data we have. We can also prepare in making better arrangements for data recording.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think quite a few of those things may be relevant to the data challenge paper.
Oh, I see. There's a separate paper on that.
Which might, so we might want to separate out some of those, but we, you know, well, I'm repeating what Dennis and Valerie keep saying, but, you know, we can put it all in here, but we might find it's more sensible in that paper.
Yeah.
Okay.
I also think in terms of dealing with data biases, I mean, from my point of view, you know, a question is enough done in terms of developing observation models for, you know, for Bayesian inference for process models. So I think there's enough, you know, I mean, I'm personally quite guilty of just doing something really basic. And I think there's probably a lot that could be done by incorporating some of the comments we've had here in terms of how you understand how the data is being collected in order to make much better use of it than we currently do.
And maybe we could also feed into the data challenges and something, because in the sense that as you're modeling and understanding biases and inadequacies and inaccuracies, that gives some idea about what data you would want to collect. And so make some suggestions on that. Well, I mean, I think this is the sort of thing which the Royal Society is very well placed to try and put forward with its links to government and to the possibility of organizing big data studies even.
It's just checking that the discussion, which is essentially the first discussion, read the data challenges, is tomorrow morning at 10. So anybody who is free and had time to feed into that would be, you know, would be really good.
Afraid not.
But others might. Going also changing tack slightly, but going back to what TJ said a bit earlier about all the problems of UQ in general in a, you know, when dealing with a big system. I mean, there was, or hopefully still is, the plan to write a more tutorial paper account of UQ. So one could imagine that here one could point to that and say, talk about the problems of scaling up some of those methods in the context of a much bigger model and system. But I don't know how well that fits together, but it might fit quite nicely.
Just on that note, so there was some discussion, sorry, I missed last week's discussion, I couldn't make it, but there was talk perhaps about widening the scope of the challenges slightly towards more of dealing with uncertainty rather than just estimation, or what was the outcome of that discussion? Are we focusing specifically on estimation and calibration, or are we being a bit wider than that and just thinking about how you deal with uncertainties at these different stages? Because of course if
you look at the document, TJ, you'll see, I'm not sure who put it there, but at the very, very top, there's a suggestion of a change of title.
I think that was probably me.
Right. Okay.
But I don't know. But I don't know whether I don't know what came of that, because we sort of, when Ian and I sort of first put a bunch of stuff together, it was a little bit more focused towards sort of uncertainty and in different stages rather than just purely on the kind of estimation. And I wasn't quite sure whether that was the approach that people were thinking about, whether that was reasonable or not. So I was just raising it here as a discussion point, because
I think what was basically discussed in the sense that if we look at what the thoughts people have had so far, they've almost exclusively been about uncertainty and taking account of uncertainty, and traditional ideas of estimation are almost completely absent. So it seems that the way ahead probably would be to refocus, unless we have to make a separate challenge starting from scratch.
I think
do an estimation.
That's exactly right. I mean, in the early stages, it seemed to be entirely focused on uncertainty, and we were a little bit worried that the more traditional estimation had disappeared from view everywhere, and so there was a bit of an attempt to feed it back in here, but it certainly wasn't meant in any way to take over. So I think the broader sense is right.
Yeah, I mean, from my point of view, I think there should be a bit more about estimation and issues to do with estimation in there, but I think it could fit within this general idea of uncertainty quantification as a tool that enables that.
I mean, I agree. I think there are enough challenges just in the estimation bit for a paper, but it's just whether the structure as it sits at the moment brings in some other ideas as well as just challenges with, all the different types of approaches that are being used.
Yeah, no, I'm seeing it. I think I'm seeing it as I agree with you. I mean, there probably is in most of these challenges that most of the sections there's things that could be, but I think it's just part of this wider framework in this paper, I think.
Hi, this is Jasmina. I'm really sorry I joined very late. I was at another meeting. So I guess you have resolved all the questions now.
Completely. We're just waiting for you to put it right for us, though.
Is there a document I should look at while I'm sitting here right now?
Yeah, in the Dropbox for challenge 7 estimation.
Okay.
There's the challenge 7 estimation ... and the one with the initials PD at the end is the most recent.
And that is the same text that was there before, but in a different order.
Further,
Okay.
yes. Further random permutations are discouraged.
Oh, I don't know.
I'm not planning on doing any.
But I think the discussion at the moment is how do we turn this how do we get some more focused challenges, and also a question of how wide is the scope, where I think that we're agreeing that we interpret estimation widely so as to include wider questions of uncertainty.
Just to check back for my sanity, really. Last week at the meeting, we talked that Ian and was it Ian and TJ were going to talk, and is this permutation a result of that conversation?
As far as I understand, there wasn't a conversation.
Oh, okay.
I'm not. Yeah, I think we had a conversation 2 weeks ago, which
That's
is where
right. I think there was a slight confusion, which partly arose because I think Dennis missed one meeting and so was sort of thinking back 2 weeks, and I picked up on what he said and couldn't remember. And so between us, the net result was there was a bit of misinformation flying around for a while. But I think Ian and TJ did speak, but at an earlier point. And we weren't waiting for that last week. And I was quite wrong when I said that. So
it just made
many
me think
apologies for that confusion. But anyway, so since our meeting, I think the main thing that has happened is that Phil has looked at the document that we had and tried to rearrange things into a more coherent order. And what we were talking about now is really the need to try and extract from that the specific challenges, or sort of crystallize these bullet points into some specific challenges. And I think that's pretty much where we'd reached, and there'd been some discussion about that.
Great, thank you for bringing me up to speed.
That's fine.
So we're not at the stage where we are thinking about splitting groups and writing parts. We are still thinking through the challenges. Is that right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Still trying to identify them, I guess.
I think we would welcome volunteers who see a niche for writing a challenge or two. I think just have an example actually of sort of someone bringing these rather wide, interesting, discursive conversations about uncertainty into a bit more focus, relating it to the kind of problems you face in with a pandemic going on would be good.
Maybe having a small, so what worked well in the modeling paper is that we kind of came together in smaller groups and we thought through a challenge or challenges,
Exactly,
and then we wrote about it.
That's the next stage we would like to get to.
Well, we identified the challenge of actually calibrating complex models and stochastic models. That's already in the bullet points.
But then equally a challenge of overfitting or over trusting simple models. Right? It's a double-edged sword, no?
And over trusting complex models as well.
And over trusting both, but yes, okay, so we have it already here, no?
I'm not sure. Do we?
I think there's a challenge
How
about
can complex models be related to reality? The challenge is representing for uncertainty. We could twist that around to trust in the model because or not because of uncertainty.
I think that's not just about uncertainty. I think model discrepancy is about a bit more than discrepancy, than uncertainty. It's about over complex models not representing things well. It's about simple models not representing things well. And it's an incredibly difficult problem, but it's one that if Ian was here, he would talk much more eloquently about it than I do. But how you actually get from the modeler where the deficiencies in the model are and how you build that into some uncertainty estimate that you can then compare models of different complexities in a rational way.
And that's going to very much depend also on the data available, because one expects that as more and more data are brought in, then it might be necessary to complicate the model a little bit more, but not too much.
It will also depend on the question you're asking, right?
Sure.
You can have the data you wish, but if you're asking a different question at a different time with a model, because the model can answer only that question, that's you might have quite high accuracy, i.e. low uncertainty, but doesn't necessarily mean that it's right.
Yes, I mean, it always depends on the question, but there's the difference. In a sense, it's about the continual trade-off between bias and variance.
Yeah.
Having a lot of data, you may be able to reduce your variance,
yeah,
but you may have a large bias that's now much more important than the variance. So for decision making, a poor model with large uncertainty might actually be better than one with lots of data with a very small variance, but the truth is over here. That can really mislead you. So you need to be, it's a very difficult problem, and it involves, I think, taking us into places outside our comfort zone about model discrepancy. How good or bad is our model? Do we expect our model to be?
So I guess instead of calling this modeling issues, we could call it the challenges of correct modeling. And that's our challenge for that paragraph we can write about.
I don't know about correct modeling. Many people,
okay, maybe
there's
not
no such
correct.
thing.
It's not the right word, sorry.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, useful modeling.
The challenge of modeling.
That's very general.
Appropriate modeling. It's not, it's again, I kind of think about it in a terms of accuracy, but I shouldn't really, I know.
I think it's about the relationship between the real world and the model.
The challenge of modeling real life pandemics. Yeah. Just simply that. I mean, it's a whole paper about it, but we'll write it in a paragraph.
I mean, I actually, so this is the section that's currently called modeling issues. Is that right, Jasmina?
Yes, yeah, I was looking at that, focusing on it for now.
So I kind of think that a lot of the, that quite a bit of the estimation, like the traditional estimation stuff, could go in that section. So, a lot of it is about how you fit models, how you assess different models, how you assess fit, and so on.
Yeah, I mean, that's how I'm thinking as well, but we just need to kind of call it a challenge of something, and then we can have a group working on writing that. And then there'll be a challenge of having the right, wrong, sufficient, accurate data, which is the next paragraph. And does that, and with the focus on what does that tell us about estimation, accuracy, uncertainty, robustness, etc.
Is the other thing that underpins all of this, though, it's speed, right? That's so because whatever modeling is being done has to be turned around very, very quickly. There's always going to be compromises in terms of what people do. And so I think that, like, to me, one of the major challenges is the fact that we can't just go away and do a 3-year project to try and do the best job we can, because a lot of the modeling groups having to turn stuff around so quickly. It's amazing what people are doing, but that pressure never goes away in a pandemic, right? I think perhaps something that might underpin the paper is the fact that all of these things we're discussing, at every stage there's a compromise that has to be made because things have to be done quickly.
But one of the challenges, I suppose, is trying to see what could be put in place over the next 2 or 3 years, so that, are there things that could be put in place to make it easier to do what you want to be able to do next time, even if not now.
if I can follow on from what TJ was saying, we found ourselves having to turn out model outputs at such a speed, and you have to adapt the model to various changes from government interventions and different unforeseen aspects of the pandemic, that you don't have time to do the robust sort of model checks that you'd like to do. So anything that can sort of automate the complexity of the model. So I know that on SPI-M, I think we've got a relatively simple model that's got quite a complex parameterization, or lots of parameters that we estimate, whereas most have got much more complex models with fewer parameters, and that gets reflected in the uncertainty. And but how useful these models are, just an automated process that you go through that would sort of come up with a way of knowing if you've got too many parameters, if you're being overly precise in your forecasts, or if your forecasts aren't robust enough. That would be really reassuring. We had something in place that we weren't having to make it up on the fly.
One of the ways of coping with an over-parameterized model is putting in reasonable prior distributions, which with a suitable degree of uncertainty in them, because that will count against making precise predictions. Because you don't know what these parameters are. The worst thing you do is have a very complicated model, or even a simple model for that matter, you say you've got with lots of parameters, and not worry too much about the uncertainty in the parameters.
Yeah. I mean, I think that in a way, both those comments are true. So I guess part of the challenge is the challenges are to sort of say, if this happens again in a few years' time, where would we like to be in terms of the sort of readily available techniques? But also, I think TJ's point is something that is never going to go away, because however good we've got to, or whatever point we've got to, that we're always going to have this issue of how how you do things faster than you'd ideally like. We'd always like more time. I suspect that's never going to change. So maybe there does need to be a section in here that talks about how you make those compromises, and how you what kind of things you might want to consider when making those compromises. And I think Nigel Goldenfield has kind of got quite a nice take on this, and I know he's been part of these conversations in the past. Which is how you do this in practice, because we're never going to be able to do a sort of the most perfect uncertainty quantification.
What do you guys think about the challenge of, for fitting stochastic models, we typically have to work with summary statistics to fit the model in terms of summary statistics across the population or subgroups of the population. And actually selecting the right summary statistics can affect the efficiency of your optimization or your whatever technique you're using, and how well it performs in terms of the final result. That in itself is a challenge, a more technical challenge, directly related to estimation. Selecting the right kinds of summaries of your information to make inference about relevant parameters. Sound familiar? Or this is just something that you guys are just very good at and I just suck at?
I was about to leave, but I'd like to add to this. Again, I made a comment earlier about using secure research servers that you can't get full data off. And I think basing inference on summary statistics is going to be another important issue going forward, because that's what you can extract.
Exactly.
Hopefully there'll be an improvement next time on how you use these secure environments. I wouldn't just give up the idea of making them a little bit more flexible, because I mean, frankly, they are pretty rigid at the moment. Or even what you can run in there, what you can elaborate. Oh, hi, sorry, I'm very late, by the way. There is one thing, and I'm sure you mentioned them. I'm sure it's in the document. is model criticism. I am becoming, and you might call this uncertainty quantification, maybe. I'm really getting very frustrated now in the work that we do. Just so looking at, well, you know, different estimates and different predictions, and people don't have the don't seem to have the frame of mind or the curiosity to understand what's happening in their model. And some of them, as Paul said, are quite complicating. They use lots of data sets and everything, but you know, again, they don't really seem to want, or maybe they haven't got time, I don't know, to want to understand what where the different pieces of information, where the information comes from, basically. And why some particular model they use is a particular type of data, it's performing differently from another one, and what the different pieces of information are. There is no interest at all, and the more I push in, the less I get back, and I'm really getting frustrated. Anyway, sorry.
Well, is there anything we can do to back you up, Daniel? I think it's a very important point.
I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. I'll think about it, but maybe writing about it would already help. Yeah. I think Paul is gone now. Oh no, he's still there.
No, I was just writing a goodbye message in the chat.
You don't feel as frustrating as I am, obviously, but
yes, there's lots of frustrations, lots of things that we could and should be able to do if we weren't in such a fast-moving situation. I think constantly hearing, "Don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good," but my inclination is to aim for the perfect.
Okay, so where are we with all of this? And sorry, I joined with a in our delay, so I'm a bit lost. Sorry, there was the previous meeting. It went on for too long. It said, what's the state of
We're still identifying challenges at this moment, and then hopefully, when we have the challenges, writing groups would be the next steps.
I thought it was a very big list that TJ had put together maybe a couple of weeks ago.
That's been rearranged by Philip.
Ah, sorry, I haven't seen the latest version then. Okay.
And Glenn, I got notes that you've been editing the document too.
Yeah, I've just saved it as a different version, but I can incorporate.
There's no substantive changes. Yes.
Well, I was just adding a few points as I was thinking of them, but yeah, I can add them into whatever becomes the next version.
Yeah, that'll be helpful.
I mean, I think where we're at is that we're trying to sort of cluster the challenges that are there into a sort of set of themes. I think that's probably what we're thrashing around since.
I think my impression is that the ones, the bullet points that are under, that Phil's got under modeling issues, and then the next 3 under data issues, those are more hopefully sort of focused and a bit easier to crystallize out the challenges, which seems to be a problem at the moment. And it's the first 2 groups, the lot that are under introduction generalities and changes over time, that are perhaps need a bit more thought to see how to extract the challenges. But maybe the changes over time may not be so hard, because we can pull out the challenge in the in the early stage, and then as time goes on and so on. And maybe most of the early section, although when we raised this earlier, Phil said some, but he thought not all, was sort of introductory material, and some was challenges. So perhaps the real issue is to sort of these bits to try and focus on the challenges, well, all the way through, but the hardest bit might be this first or second section.
Okay.
But that's just an impression.
Yeah. Okay, I'll have to read it, obviously. Sorry, I haven't looked at the latest version.
Changing continuously.
Did we keep track of the challenges that were mentioned during this conversation, or do we want people to add them to the document after this session?
I think it would be really good if people could add them to the document. But Daniela, we have actually managed to record this this discussion for once, so you might be able to.
I wasn't present, so that'd be nice if I can.
Yeah, so you should, in a day or so, it should be available for you to listen to.
If you've got time.
Exactly.
Good. I'm glad.
So what was just occurring to me then was, I wonder whether what we want is something like a section which says this is like our ideal. So this, you know, like lays out the uncertainty quantification framework and says, you know, these are the kind of things that you would ideally like to do. And then there's a section which says, you know, as the epidemic progresses, our ability to do this changes because we get more data and we understand what's going on more. Yeah. And then a series of more specific challenges under that, which are, we can relate back maybe to the different stages, which are about how we actually do estimation, things like model checking and validation and so on that you were talking about, Daniela. And then how we, and well, the two sections that Philip showed there, so the kind of modeling, I've said modeling and estimation issues, and then data issues are very specifically about, you know, how we cope with the very complex data we get and the fact that the statistics suddenly change halfway through and how they're collected, all those types of issues. So
okay, maybe I can interact with Paul and Josh to list to bring about more specific challenges that we've experienced, and I'm sure some of them are already there. So whatever else we might want to add, we'll add it. Yeah, I'll do with them, because if I then tend to do it if promise to do it myself on my own, then, you know, it's not gonna get done, I'm afraid. So we'll come back with those, but you know what you just listed now, it kind of reminds me of the initial discussion that we were having, the way that we were formulating as a sort of temporal you know, temporal challenges which were, you know, sort of different over time.
Yeah.
And yeah, it sounds, I remember from the initial discussions. So I really need to get hold of the latest version and add to that.
Well, I think there's a gap, and I think I've got to go imminently. So during this gap, I shall say thanks, everybody. See you next time.
Thanks, Phil.
Yeah, thanks.
So is there more that we can discuss now? Now that we've got Danny, we don't want to lose. to do with you?
No, for God's sake, no. Maybe if you can point, if you can send me the location, the link to the latest version. Maybe now that I've
It
got
ends with
a
the
little.
initials LC and PD.
Sorry.
It ends with LC and PD, unless Glenn added stuff to it. Glenn, did you?
I did. I've created a version which ends GM.
Okay, that's it then.
So are you able to see the Dropbox, Danny?
In principle, yes. In practice, if you can send me the link or something, I can't
I have
find
to run,
it
guys.
now. No.
Thanks, Lou.
Bye.
Danny, should I send you another invitation to it? That may be the easiest thing.
Yeah, I think it will save me some.
Yeah. It's anything that saves you time.
Then you said, and 8 others have made changes. Maybe I can maybe I found it. Maybe.
The other thing that occurs to me is the sort of expert elicitation people, they sort of had quite a strong idea. Is that sort of branching off into a separate paper, or is that, are they still?
Yeah, Ian had very strong ideas.
I think my understanding, but it's I haven't updated it lately, so I don't know whether it's right. But there was talk of both the UQ people and the expert elicitation people writing separate, sort of more expository papers, as well as which can appear in the same issue. As well as this, but I haven't checked. I don't know, and unfortunately Phil has now left us, so we can't check with him. But I think he and Will Probert were or maybe mainly Will, were writing something that they thought might on the elicitation side.
Okay, found the invitation. Thanks. Go to the folder.
So I've just opened the latest version. You've added a few extra bits and pieces to this, have you, Glenn?
Yeah, I was just making some comments as we were talking. But...
Okay, that's great. So where it says reorganized by PD on the 8th, we now need to have and added to by GM on the 9th.
So the latest version is the ones today.
Yeah, it should be today with Glenn's initials at the end.
7/16, yeah, 26, 17. Oh, it's changed a lot. Yes, I can see that. Okay.
Maybe after we finish, if everyone would agree to close the document, when we finish, I will just rename it with today's date and no initials, because that name's getting a bit long. So I'll just just put it down with 9 DEC at the end, so you've got the date.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I'll wait till we finish, because I don't want to do it while someone's in the middle of editing it or adding it. So Glenn, you can add a few more thoughts if you want.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm gonna have to go in a minute. I was just wondering, are there any actions pending for next week then?
I think there's the invitation to try and carve out a challenge or two, if you would like to.
To sort of pick up the text within what is written here and call it challenge 1, challenge 2, etc.,
Yeah,
and
or
describe
to,
that.
or to add to it or replace it with
Okay.
something
think
that's more focused as a challenge relating to the pandemic rather than just a general discussion. Which, a lot of these points are very good general discussion, but they're not they're not quite sort of tied to the pandemic and phrased as a challenge for epidemiologists, which is what we're hoping they will do.
Yeah, I mean, maybe it's to make it slightly less daunting. One can just, if you look and you can see an obvious challenge that can be pulled out of this, so sort of identify that. And if we gradually work through, maybe we can get a list of challenges, and there might be a sort of rag bag of good ideas that we haven't found a home for, but maybe we can do it sort of sequentially rather than trying to get the whole thing in shape in one go.
Yeah, otherwise we'll never finish. Yes.
Right.
Okay, so maybe, I mean, there is an invitation, I think I'd like to say, if somebody wants to have a call for half an hour in a small working group, this worked really well when we had it done in the modeling paper with me to pick up some challenges. And I'm kind of looking at Glenn here at the moment because we work well.
I'm kind of sitting here thinking I might just try and find a bit of time just to see if I can order things a bit.
I was going to say, Glenn, if you added some numbers, like we did with the modelling paper, 7.1 to 7.5 or whatever, if you think you can break it into reasonably sort of logical divisions.
Yeah.
So 7.0 will be whatever you think is really just introductory remarks, and then if you like to identify bits which you think might make one or more challenges as 7.1, 7.2, etc., that would
very good.
That would just make it easier for people to chip in. Then they can say, "I'm going to," they can
exactly,
down the group.
Yes.
Saying, I'm going to look at 7.3 and 7.4, something like that. Or does anyone want to discuss or whatever? Just I think that was how we made progress with the modelling thing. So in that case, what I'll do instead of what I said I'd do is I'll leave it to Glenn to after we finish. If you could put in, do a little bit of reordering if you like, and put in some numbers, and then save it with GM 9th December 9th deck or whatever.
Yeah. Okay. It won't be.
That's a good plan.
I was going to say it might be the 10th of December by the time Glenn gets it.
In the words of Thurber, don't get it right, get it written.
And if you want to talk about anything, Glenn, I'm here. And then I think maybe that's the task then for next week, and then people to read through those, and then we come together next week and start populating those sections, I guess.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
Okay, I'm gonna have to go. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye, Jasmina. Thanks for coming. Yeah, I'm gonna have to disappear in a minute too.
Done for the moment. We said we'd run 6:30, so we could please everyone by finishing 4 minutes early.
Okay.
I think that should we just stop there? And if anyone's got immediate ideas as to what they would, particularly suggestions for ordering that they want to make, they should make them to Glenn. They could send some comments to Glenn this evening. But otherwise, we'll just wait and see what Glenn comes up with. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Sounds wonderful to me. As long as Glenn doesn't.
Good, Glenn. We learned to do the thing.
I did offer. Okay, we'll see you next week. I might see something. I'm going to come to the data thing tomorrow as well, Valerie. So
good, that's great. Yeah.
Okay, I shall stop recording there.
See you in the morning then.
Yeah, bye.
Okay.